I thought I understood what it meant to lose everything. When I was 13, the regime took my mother, dragged her out into the night for some whispered crime against the empire. I waited by the window for 3 days, watching the snow swallow the road outside our house. She never came back. When I was 14, they took our home. The notice was nailed to the door like a proclamation of war. 2 soldiers in black fatigues stood at the gate, watching as my brother Arden and I were forced to pack what little we could carry. A neighbour tried to protest. They shot him in the leg. By the time I was 15, I was sure there was nothing left they could take. I was wrong. The wind coming off the coast howled like something feral, all teeth and no soul. I crouched beneath a crumbling seawall, shivering, in my threadbare coat, watching the waves punch the rocks below. It had taken me 3 days to reach the Caldera coast, and now that I was here, I wasn't sure why I'd come. Cassian Vale, the man I called Cass, but who everyone else knew as Colonel Vale, or just the ghost, was in a coma, shot point blank outside a safe house during a failed evacuation. The bullet hadn't killed him. It had fractured the left side of his skull, thrown him into unconsciousness, and left the underground resistance without its strategist, without its Shadow King. Rumour said he was being looked after by one of the last loyalists, Dr. Emil Crane, a former field surgeon with a reputation for saving men other doctors pronounced dead. Cass had pulled him from the wreckage of a prison camp 3 years ago. The debt ran deep. I pulled a crumpled photograph from my pocket. It was old, a black and white still from the early days, the edges worn from folding. Cass stood with one arm over Arden's shoulder. I was off to the side, nearly out of frame, looking awkward in a borrowed coat. Behind us, the remnants of the original resistance command gathered like ghosts. That was before the coup, before General Maro Salvek returned from exile with his private army and took the capital in less than a day. Before they executed the last Prime Minister, live on state television, and started what they called the Purification Era, before they burned the violet flag. I stuffed the photo back in my pocket and stood, brushing off the damp gravel. The last hiding place Cass had used was up the coast, an abandoned hotel built into the cliffs. Locals called it the Grin, because the cracked face of the building looked like a twisted smile. The resistance used to leave messages hidden there, in the old mail slots, behind fake tiles, under floorboards. I knew how to find them. Cass had taught me. I walked fast, hood low, heart hammering as the sun dipped behind the cliffs. A freight ship crawled across the distant horizon like a wounded beast. I tried to shake the feeling that I was being watched, but that was something else Cass had taught me. Paranoia kept you alive. The Grin loomed out of the rocks like a decaying fortress. Its windows were dark holes. The lobby doors stood crooked on their hinges. I climbed through a side entrance and stepped into the shadows. The silence hit me like a slap. No seagulls, no wind. I moved carefully through the corridors, sweeping, my flashlight in slow arcs. Dust curled in the beam. Water dripped from broken pipes above. In the reception area, the fake wall panel behind the desk was already open, but empty. Whoever had been here last had cleaned it out. I moved to the second hiding spot, a loose tile beneath the stairs. My hands trembled as I pried it loose. Nothing. Third spot, behind the service elevator panel. Still nothing. My throat tightened. I hadn't realized how much I was counting on finding something. Anything. From Cass. A note. An order. A sign that he'd planned for this. But there was only silence and shadows and the memory of a man who had taught me to be invisible. I sank to the ground, pressed my back to the cold wall, and let myself sob. For Cass. For Arden. For everything we'd lost. I didn't move until the sky outside turned black and the flashlight began to flicker. I'd kept one charge pack in my coat lining, a trick Cass had shown me back when the ration grid still worked. I changed the cell and forced myself back to my feet. Cass would have hated to see me like this. Broken. Weak. I could almost hear his voice in my ear. Sarah, you're stronger than this. You're not a victim. You're a weapon. Maybe I was, but I didn't feel like one. I left the Grin before midnight and started south along the cliff path toward the village of Luro. That's where Arden had said she'd be, last time we spoke, if the network was still alive, if the Empire hadn't found her yet. She'd signed her last message with a code phrase we'd used as kids. Crows don't cry. It meant she was in trouble, and that she needed me. Luro was a ghost town. Half the windows were boarded, the other half were broken. The old clock tower had collapsed into the square, crushing the fountain beneath. I passed the burnt husk of what used to be the community centre and found the little cafe Cass used as a signal point. The chalkboard out front read, "Soup of the day, silence." That was her signal. Arden was here. I stepped inside. The cafe was lit only by candlelight. 3 figures sat at the far table, half-eaten bread between them. The woman behind the counter looked up when the bell jingled over the door, and when our eyes met, she dropped the bottle she was holding. "Sarah?" I nodded. She ran around the counter and pulled me into a hug that almost knocked me off my feet. I hadn't realized how much I needed it until she wrapped her arms around me. Her hair smelled like smoke and lemons. "You made it," she whispered. "You sent the signal. I came." She pulled back and looked me over. "You're freezing and filthy and older. So are you." We both laughed just for a moment. It felt like oxygen after drowning. Then her eyes darkened. Cass? Alive. But barely. Her shoulders sagged. "He's with Crane." I nodded. "Somewhere inland. I didn't go with him. I needed to check the Grin." "Anything." I shook. "My head. Damn it," she muttered, running a hand through her hair. "I was hoping." "I know." She guided me to the back room and closed the door. The others stayed outside, watching, probably armed. That was good. "I've got 5 people left I can trust," she said. "One of them might be compromised, but it's hard to tell. Everyone's scared. Salvek's new regime is offering pay and pensions if people register with the Loyalty Commission. 2 of our people disappeared last week. Dead? Unclear. We have a safe house." She nodded. "The old vineyard. It's off-grid. No comms. We've been running paper couriers only. And the doctor. I sent word yesterday. If he gets it, he'll send someone." I pulled off my coat and sat on the cot in the corner. My legs ached. My ribs felt bruised from the fall I'd taken 2 nights ago. Arden knelt in front of me and took my hands. "We thought you were dead," she said softly. "I thought we all were." We sat in silence for a while, just breathing the same air. Then I said the words I'd been holding inside since I heard the news. "They dumped him in the sea." Her fingers tightened around mine. "I know. No grave, no name. Just gone. That's what they do now," she whispered. "The ones they're afraid of, they erase." I nodded. The tears had dried. The fury hadn't. "So what do we do?" I asked. Arden stood, crossed to the desk, and opened a drawer. She pulled out a faded map of the city, the capital, Corvellum, and laid it across the table. Red circles marked known patrols, blue marks for suspected safe zones, 3 black X's near the South Quarter. First we get our people safe. Then we start finding others. Then, I looked at her. Then we burn it all down. I didn't sleep much that night. Too many ghosts in the walls. Too many memories in the dark. I kept thinking about the first time I met Cassian Vale, a man with blood on his hands and secrets behind his smile. I'd hated him at first. Then I'd needed him. Then I'd loved him. Not like that. Not really. He'd been my guardian, my teacher, my protector, and sometimes, in the worst moments, I thought maybe I'd been his reason not to give up completely. Now he was dying in a cold bed somewhere, and I was walking back into a war we already lost. But I wasn't the same girl I'd been when it started. And, this time, I wasn't going to run. The vineyard safe house was a ruin. Once, it had belonged to a minor noble family, the sort who posed with antique rifles and served fermented peach wine at summer gatherings. Now it stood like a forgotten monument to the fall of the old order. Vines choked the fence. Half the shutters hung loose. The red tile roof sagged. The place smelled of mold, damp stone, and something darker, something underneath. Arden led the way. We arrived in the grey haze of dawn, 2 shadows slipping between collapsed buildings and overgrown lanes. The others, her team, had already gone ahead the night before. We'd taken different routes, moving in pairs, just in case. Felt the weight of the pistol she'd given me pressing against my ribs with every step. An old Tempest M9, battered, scratched, and loaded with 3 rounds. The barrel smelled faintly of ash. It had killed someone recently. I didn't ask who. Arden stopped at the rusted gate. "Stay close," she whispered, "and keep your eyes open. There's a tripwire under the 2nd floor landing. If I go down, don't try to save me. Run." I nodded. We slipped through the gate, past the dry fountain, across the gravel path. The wind shifted, and I caught a whiff of burning. Diesel, not nearby. Not yet, but close enough to feel it like a warning. The front door creaked open before we reached it. A boy stepped out, maybe 17, wiry, pale, with the wide eyes of someone who didn't sleep much. He had a long scar, running from his ear to his collarbone. The kind of scar you get when you're left for dead and nobody comes for hours. "Arden," he said, voice cracking. "You're back." "Still in one piece," she replied. "Eli, this is Sarah." He looked at me, blinking fast. Then he nodded. "You're the one from the photo." I froze. "What photo?" "The one on Cass's desk. In the villa." "Before?" "The siege." I didn't know what to say to that. I just followed them inside. The safe house was worse inside than out. They'd covered the windows with blackout plastic and patched holes in the roof with scavenged tarpaulin. One corner of the living room had been turned into a makeshift infirmary, complete with surgical tools, iodine, and a set of hand-drawn diagrams showing pressure points and blood flow. Another corner had a small wood-burning stove. Beside it, an old armchair, a guitar with 2 strings, and a coffee tin full of used batteries. Survival chic. The team had made themselves at home. There were 4 of them besides Arden and Eli. Lena, the oldest, maybe mid-30s, was a demolition expert with sunburned skin and an unsettling laugh. She nodded at me when we entered, then went back to sharpening a butterfly knife with slow, deliberate strokes. Tomic, quiet and huge, sat on the floor beside a half-disassembled drone. He barely looked up. Mira, blonde, sleepless, with inked arms and a notebook full of codes, paced between the rooms, whispering to herself. And then there was Caleb, younger than the rest, sharper too. The kind of sharp that cut both ways. His eyes didn't miss anything. Not my warm boots, not the trembling in my left hand, not the faint pink scar on my temple, still healing from an old fall. "Another ghost," he muttered. "We keep collecting them." "Enough," Arden snapped. "Sarah's family." Caleb said nothing, but I saw the edge in his jaw. They didn't trust me yet. I couldn't blame them. That night, I stayed in the attic. The floor creaked with every step, and dust hung in the air like breath that refused to settle. Someone had dragged an old mattress into one corner, and I dropped my pack beside it before collapsing into the makeshift bed. I didn't sleep. Instead, I pulled out Cass's photograph again, the one I'd carried across the hills, across the broken cities and dead bridges. I studied his face, that quiet certainty in his eyes, the calm resolve like a storm kept in a bottle. He would have hated this safe house. Too vulnerable, too obvious, too hopeful. Cass never hoped. He planned. I tucked the photo beneath the mattress and tried to remember the last thing he'd said to me. Everyone's lying, Sarah. Even the good ones. Morning came with the sound of boots on gravel. Lena was outside, cursing under her breath, as she tried to kickstart the generator. Mira boiled water for tea and scrawled something frantic in her notebook. Arden was already at the map table, redrawing supply lines and drop points, and Caleb was watching me from the corner. He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "You're really her," he said after a while. "Should I not be?" He shrugged. "Cass talked about you, not often, but when he did, it mattered." I poured myself a cup of black tea. It tasted like ash and mint. He used to say talking too much was a security risk. Maybe. Or maybe he just didn't want us to know he still had hope. I looked at him, really looked. Beneath the suspicion and sharp tongue, there was grief. The kind that festered. I recognized it. I wore it too. "Were you close?" I asked. He didn't answer, just turned and left. By midday, a runner arrived, a girl, no older than 10, barefoot and fast. She carried a folded napkin in her waistband, stitched with a blue thread. When Arden took it, her face changed. "He's awake." I didn't breathe for a full 5 seconds. "Cass," she nodded. "Crane sent word. He opened his eyes last night, said a name." "What name?" She looked at me, like it hurt to say it. "Yours." My heart cracked open. "I have to see him." "You will," Arden said gently. "Tonight." "Why wait?" "Because there's more." Crane's compound was hit 2 days ago. A patrol, not official army, something worse. Private enforcers, Salvec's Black Mark Division. I flinched. Everyone knew about the Black Marks. Former bounty hunters, mercenaries, psychos in uniform. Unregulated, unaccountable, and completely loyal to Salvec. How bad? "They're looking for Cass. They know he's alive." I sat down. Hard. "So, what now?" "We move him," Arden said. "Crane's prepping. We'll set a meeting point at the edge of the quarantine zone, near the broken cathedral. You and I go ahead to secure the site. Caleb and Lena follow with the Doc and Cass." She glanced at me. "Can you handle that?" "Yes." I didn't even hesitate. By dusk, we were ready. I changed into darker clothes, fitted jeans, a canvas jacket, boots I could run in. Arden handed me a comms bead. "Keep it on," she said. "No matter what." The meeting point was 5 miles southeast, through ravaged towns and scattered checkpoints. We had forged papers, silencers, backup routes, but none of that guaranteed safety. Salvec's men were wolves. They smelled weakness like blood. We moved fast, silent, invisible, like Cass had taught us. The cathedral stood on the edge of a collapsed district. Its spire snapped in two like a broken bone. Fires had gutted most of the nearby buildings, and the ash made the ground crunch underfoot. A giant violet mural had once covered the cathedral walls, a goddess holding a sword and a child. Now only fragments remained. We made our stand there, in the house of broken glass. Arden took the south approach. I watched the north. We waited. At 11:06 p.m., a flashlight flickered twice from the far ridge. Signal. I moved into position. Cass arrived on a gurney rigged to a makeshift sled, wrapped in blankets. Crane crouched beside him, whispering something as he checked vitals. Caleb followed, gun raised. "Anything?" Arden asked as they crossed into the nave. "No tails," Caleb replied. I ran to the gurney. Cass looked like a ghost. His face was sunken, skin pallid, but his eyes were open, barely. And when he saw me, something sparked. "Sarah," he whispered. I grabbed his hand. "I'm here. You made it." Tears threatened. I forced them back. "Stay with me, Cass. Just stay." I never left. His fingers tightened, weak but real. Crane stepped in. "We need to go. This place is compromised." He was right, but I couldn't stop staring at Cass. He was alive. and for the first time since the coup, I felt something ignite in my chest. Not rage, not grief, not even vengeance. It was something harder, sharper, hope, tempered into steel. The sky turned the color of bruised steel the morning after we brought Cass out of the cathedral ruins. Stormlight without rain. Arden said it meant trouble. Crane said it meant nothing. The weather doesn't care if the empire is falling apart. But still, none of us looked up at the clouds without flinching. They pressed down like a hand on your back. We'd moved Cass to an abandoned tunnel system below the market district. Years ago, it had been part of a forgotten tram project, one of the Violet Empire's endless attempts to modernize its crumbling cities. The construction was abandoned after the budget dried up, leaving behind damp stone corridors and rusted tracks, perfect for ghosts like us. Tamik and Lena rigged a backup generator using salvaged car batteries and parts from the vineyard. Mira ran a string of hand-built sensors along the surface entrances. Caleb insisted on sleeping beside the main tunnel gate, gun across his chest, and Cass. Cass drifted between sleep and silence. The doctors called it post-coma fatigue. His brain was awake, but his body was still catching up. He couldn't sit upright without help. His voice was a whisper, but his eyes burned. They were watching, calculating, waiting. I sat beside him during the second night underground. The flickering lantern cast dancing shadows against the wall. He looked pale in that light, like marble carved from ash. "You're not supposed to die," I whispered. He smiled faintly. "I didn't. You almost did. Almost is a coward's measurement." I chuckled once, dry and humorless. "You sound like the man I remember." "I am that man." "Then why haven't you said anything? Why haven't you taken control back?" He looked at me, eyes narrowing. "Because I'm not ready," he said simply. "And if I try too soon, I will fail. This body, this shell." He coughed, wet and deep. "It won't survive another failure." I hated hearing that. I hated the truth of it even more. So I changed the subject. "They're all looking to Arden now. You know that, right?" "She was always meant to lead," he said. "I don't think she agrees." He closed his eyes. "Then make her agree." "How?" Cass opened his eyes again, and the fire was still there. "Remind her what's worth fighting for." In the days that followed, we worked. We couldn't stay in the tunnels long. Mira's motion sensors had already picked up a scout drone near the southern grate. Probably not an official army unit, but there were dozens of freelancer groups combing the streets now. Half of them worked for Salvek. The other half worked for whoever paid the most. In Caldera, loyalty was for corpses. We broke into pairs to scavenge food, medical supplies, radio components. Arden and Eli found an old resistance comms node buried in a collapsed church rectory. Mira and Lena disarmed a proximity mine set on the South Bridge. I ran courier drops between the tunnel and our outside contacts. Couriers who used to be students, bus drivers, mothers, and ex-soldiers. They'd each seen what Salvek's new era looked like. They weren't interested in waiting for it to bloom. One afternoon, I followed Caleb through the East End to meet a weapons contact in the Black Zone. The Black Zone was what we called the district east of the finance quarter, once full of glass towers and commuter lines. Now, it was a graveyard. No lights, no sound, no mercy. The air was wrong in the Black Zone. You could taste it, like ozone and regret. Salvek's forces had bombed the region during the first uprising and left the bodies to rot under concrete. The dogs still sniffed through the ruins. We moved fast. Our contact was a smuggler called Carver, an ex-freedom fighter from the Pyrosian border war. Rumor said he used to be a colonel. Now he sold rifles and nerve gas to whoever had enough silver. He met us under an old railway bridge. "You brought the child," Kave said with a grin. "I'm 17, I said flatly. "And I'm the Emperor," he replied. Caleb gave him a warning look. "Do you have it?" Carver reached into his satchel and pulled out a long, narrow case. Caleb opened it. Inside, A precision long-barrel rifle with a mounted scope and biometric grip. There were only a handful like it in the country. "Where did you find this?" Caleb asked. Kaveh smiled without answering. "You have what I asked for." Caleb handed him a sealed pouch. Kaveh opened it, counted the silver bars inside, and whistled. "You kids must really want Salvek dead. We want everyone around him dead first," Caleb said. Kaveh handed me a second pouch, smaller, lighter. "For you," he said. "Your first rifle." I opened it carefully. Inside was a small carbine, old but well cared for. Compact, close range, no scope, heavier than I expected. "I've never—" "You will," Kaveh said. "The first time matters. Make it count." He vanished into the ruins after that, just like all the best ghosts do. Back in the tunnels, Arden was waiting. "You're late," she said. "There were complications. Always are." She looked exhausted, the kind of exhaustion that sleep doesn't fix. Her hands were shaking as she poured coffee into tin mugs. "You look like shit," I told her. She smirked. "Still prettier than you." We both sipped the terrible coffee and sat in silence until I said, "Cass wants you to lead." "I'm not him. I know. I don't want to be him." "No one's asking you to be." "Then what do they want? Someone who gives a damn." She looked at me. "You really think I do? If you didn't, you wouldn't still be here." She closed her eyes. "I don't know what the plan is anymore," she admitted. "We lost the capital. We lost the council. We're fighting shadows." "No," I said. "We're becoming them." That night, I practiced with the rifle Kaveh gave me. Tomek helped. He didn't talk much, but he was a marksman before the war. He set up bottles at 20 meters down one of the abandoned side tunnels. "Stance," he grunted. I adjusted my feet. "Grip." I changed the angle. "Breathe." I did. The shot rang like a bell in the dark. The bottle shattered. Again. We kept at it until my shoulder bruised. I didn't stop. Not once. 3 days later, Arden received a sealed envelope via courier. The old kind, wax stamp, no return mark, only the violet crest. She tore it open in front of the group. Inside, a single phrase on heavy paper, typed in capital letters. "The glass house is burning." Cass coughed violently behind us. I helped him sit upright. He blinked slowly. "Where did you get that?" Arden held it out. His fingers trembled as he took the paper. "They're sending a message," he whispered. "What does it mean?" Caleb asked. "The glass house is one of Salvek's propaganda bureaus," Arden said. "They print the state newspapers, run the loyalty reports." "If it's burning," Mira said. Cass looked up, and for the first time since his coma, his voice was steady. "It means someone started fighting back." He passed the paper to me. I ran my thumb over the words. There was no signature, no seal, no return address, but I recognized the font. "I think this came from Eliane," I said. "Eliane?" Arden asked, confused. "She was part of the intelligence wing before the purge. Cass trusted her. She vanished 6 months ago." "If she's alive," Caleb began. "She's recruiting," I said, "which means we're not the only ones left." Cass looked at us all. "Then it's time we reminded the Empire we're not done." The silence that followed was thick, charged. We hadn't called it an uprising yet. We hadn't said resistance out loud. Now we did. "We'll need a target," Arden said. "We'll need allies," Caleb added. "We'll need time," Mira said. Cass nodded. "Then we begin again." And so we did. Somewhere between dawn and memory, I began to believe again. Not in safety, or peace, or the return of anything we'd lost, but in purpose. Cass was sitting upright more often now, sometimes even managing. A few steps with Mira's help. His voice had grown stronger, the rough edge still there, but controlled. We moved him into one of the deeper rooms in the tram tunnels, a space once used to store equipment. Now, it was command. The walls were covered with maps, street routes, infrastructure schematics, utility grids, all salvaged from the government archives before Salvex men turned them to ash. I stood in the doorway with a cup of tea and watched as Cass pointed at junctions, tracing lines with a shaking finger. That's where they route the eastern grid, he muttered. It still supports the surveillance drones. If we cut it, they'll be blind on this side of the city. Assuming they don't have backups, Arden said. Cass looked at her. Of course they have backups, but they'll need to reroute power. That creates gaps. Gaps we exploit. Mira jotted something on her pad. We're planning hits now, I asked. Arden turned. Not yet, but we're close. How close? Close enough that the word resistance doesn't feel like a fantasy anymore. Cass glanced at me and gave the tiniest nod. He was grooming us again, preparing for the next chapter in a war we didn't start, but had no choice but to finish. That afternoon, we had our first real council. The table was battered, the chairs unmatched, half the lights flickered. But we sat like generals in an empire of ruins. Cass, Arden, Caleb, Mira, Lena, Tomic and me. Crane refused to join. He said war rooms brought back too many memories of dying. Cass began. We don't win this in open battle, he said. We're outnumbered, outgunned, and disconnected. But we have two advantages. First, most of Salvex men aren't soldiers. They're looters in uniforms. Second, fear. The regime is terrified of us. I'd like to make that fear tangible, Caleb said. Good, Cass replied. Then here's how we begin. He picked up a piece of chalk and sketched on the wall map a triangle connecting 3 major points in the Southern District. Point 1, Broadcast Tower 12. Point 2, South Armory Transit. Point 3, Warehouse 38. We hit these 3 targets in a coordinated strike. Same night, staggered timeline. Tower 12 controls local radio and drone feeds. The Armory's transit dock receives weapons shipments. Warehouse 38 stores the loyalty documents before they're dispatched. Arden raised an eyebrow. That's a heavy first move. It's a declaration, Cass said. We'll be exposed. Server, take it. No hesitation. No, he said. Not if we use proxies, diversion teams, cut-ins, noise in the system. Let them fight ghosts while we slip through the walls. Do we even have enough people? Mira asked. We will, Arden said. If Eliane really did send the glasshouse message, we have allies. I felt Cass's eyes on me. She'll find them, he said quietly. Everyone turned to look at me. I blinked. What? You're going to make contact? I laughed, sharp and quick. Me? You know her. You trained under her. She'll trust you. She might shoot me. That's her way of saying hello. He didn't smile. Then don't give her the chance. I looked at Arden for backup, but she was already nodding. She's right, Cass said. You're the best shot we've got. They gave me a map and a bag of old IDs. Caleb handed over a burner phone and a silver coin etched with a crooked tree. What's this for? I asked. She'll recognize it. I turned it over in my fingers. You're not coming with me. Caleb shook his head. She'll smell me a mile away. I've got blood on my hands from before the purge. She doesn't forget. I slipped the coin into my boot and left just after dusk. Destination, Torren Hill, a stretch of scorched hillside once home to foreign embassies and journalist housing. Now it was one of the dead zones. No patrols, no recon drones. Officially, the government said it was still under reconstruction. Translation, they didn't want anyone finding what they left behind. I took the northern tunnel route out of the city, then crossed the sewer bridge at low tide. Halfway through, I caught a glimpse of something floating downstream. At first I thought it was a tarp. Then I saw the fingers. I didn't stop. Didn't even breathe. Torrin Hill rose like a memory over the ruins. Burnt stone, iron gates half buried in wild ivy, a road choked by overturned cars and the wreckage of checkpoint barricades. The safe house was in an old consulate, the consulate of Norvalis, according to the rusted plaque on the gate. No power, no motion, no noise, just the wind and the promise of being watched. I used the coin, not literally, just the sound of it. I flicked it against the gate twice, then paused, then once more. Seconds passed. Then the window shutter on the third floor shifted. Only a crack. Then it vanished. The front door creaked open a minute later. I stepped inside with my hands raised. "Hello, Eliane." A shadow moved behind the cracked hallway column. "You brought company?" "No. No tail?" "Checked every alley." "You're late." "You're dramatic." She stepped into the light. Older, thinner, her long black hair now streaked with grey, but the eyes, dark, razor sharp, were exactly the same. "Cass sent me." She crossed her arms. "You're lying." "He's alive." She froze. Then, a whisper. "Prove it." I pulled out the burner phone and played the message Cass had recorded for her. A 10-second clip. "Eliane, the trees still burn purple. At night. We have not fallen. Come home." She staggered back. "That son of a bitch." I waited. Eliane finally looked at me with something like recognition. "You're Syrah." "I am." "He said you'd never last 6 months. Tell him I made it 2 years." She laughed once, bitter and hoarse. Then she pulled me into a hug I didn't expect. "You'll need a drink." The meeting began 2 hours later in the old consulate basement. 3 of Eliane's people sat at the table with me. Radic, Nima, and Oren. A mix of ex-intel and street rebels, all scarred, all wary. I laid out the plan. The 3-point strike Cass had designed, the need for support, and the growing underground movement across the districts. Eliane lit a cigarette. "You're biting off too much." "That's what Cass said when he first took on the East Dock siege," I replied. She grinned. "And we almost died for it." "Almost," I said. Oren leaned forward. "Why now? Why strike?" "Because they're not expecting it," I said. "They think we're scattered. They're wrong." Nima was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I've got access to the drone passkeys. We can jam their flight paths around Tower 12. Radic nodded. "I can get you clearance cards for the warehouse, fake ones. Might last long enough." "And I have 5 fire teams ready," Eliane said. "We were waiting for something to believe in." "You have it now," I said. They stared at me. I didn't blink. Didn't look away. Cass had said I was a weapon, so I became one. I returned to the tunnels at dawn. My legs ached. My coat smelled like smoke and rust. Caleb was waiting by the lower gate. "Took you long enough." They agreed. His eyebrows rose. "You didn't think I'd pull it off? I thought you might. I also thought I might have to come dig your body out of the dirt." "Glad to disappoint." We walked in silence. After a while, Caleb asked, "Did she remember you?" "Yes." "What did she say?" I smiled. "She offered me a drink." She always did know how to say hello. Back in the tunnels, Cass was asleep. Arden was reviewing the infiltration routes Mira had compiled. Lena and Tomic were sorting munitions. Crane hovered by the supply crates, muttering about not being a quartermaster. And for the first time since I returned to the city, I felt something crackle in the air, a charge, a map, a future, written in blood. The strike was set for 3 days from now. That's how long Eliane's fire teams needed to reposition without drawing heat. That's how long Mira needed to finish the scrambling algorithm. And that's how long Cass believed he could afford to wait before Salvek's surveillance sweep reached the southern tram tunnels. 3 days, 72 hours. I didn't sleep. For the first 12. The tram tunnel buzzed with controlled chaos. Wires snaked through the concrete like veins. Notes and sketches covered the walls. Mira scrawled new routes with chalk every hour, adjusting for movement. Lena counted detonators. Arden memorized patrol shift patterns. Caleb ran drills like a mad dog. I watched it all from a folding chair, in the war room. Once a janitor's closet, now filled with secrets. Cass sat nearby, sipping broth like it was wine, watching everyone move with a flickering intensity that hadn't been there before the coma. I missed this, he murmured. War. Rooms? I asked, raising an eyebrow. No. Purpose. He stared at a map longer than necessary. I thought I was finished, he said. I thought they'd taken everything I had left. They almost did. He smiled faintly. But they forgot one thing. What's that? You. I looked away. Praise from Cass always felt like pressure. Like being told a blade is sharp. Enough to kill. At midnight, I sat alone at the far end of the tunnel, beneath a half-lit corridor full of dripping pipes. I counted the seconds between each drop. 17. Then 19. Then back to 17 again. Footsteps echoed behind me. Caleb. He didn't say anything for a long time, just stood beside me, staring down the endless dark. You ready? He asked finally. No, I said honestly. He nodded. Me neither. We both chuckled softly. It didn't last long. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket and handed it to me. What's this? Kill list. I unfolded it. 7 names. All senior loyalty officers. All former military. All listed in descending order of priority. The last name stopped me. Orin Malky. I read aloud. He was my superior, Caleb said. During the drowning war. Left me behind after an ambush. 2 bullets in my leg. 27 bodies. I crawled for hours. Why's he on this list now? He's the new operations chief for the Loyalty Commission. He runs their prison trains. I folded the list. You planning to go off mission? He looked at me. No, he said. But if we fail this op, I want to be ready. Day 2 passed in a blur of final preparations. Elian sent word via encrypted courier. All fire teams in place. Drone jamming software uploaded to Cloudburst nodes. Timing confirmed. Cass met with Arden in private for over an hour. When she returned, her face was tight, distant. She gathered us at the center of the map room. This is it, she said. We're splitting into 3 squads. Me, Mira, and Eli will take the broadcast tower. Sarah and Caleb will hit the warehouse. Lena and Tomik will handle the armory transit. Cass sat in the corner, silent, listening. Each team is responsible for their own ingress and exfil, Arden continued. No radio chatter. Use signal beacons only if you're pinned or compromised. Missions are staggered. 20-minute gaps. Sarah and Caleb will hit second. That means you'll be exposed if Lena's team fails early. I nodded. We'll improvise. She didn't smile. Don't. Stick to the plan. We dispersed, in silence. Cass caught my hand as I passed. Sarah, he said. Yeah? If you have a clean shot at the surveillance, I won't. Good. He let go. But something lingered in his eyes. Something final. We left at dawn. Caleb and I travelled light. Pistols, knives, 2 breaching charges, and an old cloth sack that held our forged credentials. The warehouse sat on the eastern edge of Corvellum's, industrial sprawl, a concrete monolith surrounded by rusted fencing, unmanned drones, and loyalty patrols. We arrived by sewer. The stink hit first, rotten water and chemical sludge, but we moved fast, breath shallow, boots splashing quietly through ankle-deep filth. At the junction beneath the warehouse, we paused. Caleb checked his watch. 8 minutes. Copy that. We climbed the rusted access ladder and emerged into a forgotten utility closet on the 2nd floor of the warehouse. Dust swirled in the light from a cracked vent. Outside, the factory floor buzzed with machinery. Stacks of brown boxes covered the floor, each one marked with the violet star and the words, Personal Loyalty Record. Level 4. Classification names, addresses, allegiances, everything the regime used to control its people. We moved like ghosts through the upper walkway. 3 guards, 1 camera. I tapped Caleb. He nodded. He peeled left. I went right. A minute later, the lights flickered once, then twice. Mira's work, just long enough for us to move unnoticed. In the darkness, I counted the seconds. 3, 2, 1. Pop, soft and fast, the sound of Caleb's silencer. Then another. The guards were down. We planted the charge beside the main storage server, a thin black tower tucked in the corner, humming like a live wire. Timer's set, I said. 3 minutes. Caleb stepped back and watched me. You good? I nodded. Then he looked down. Below, a guard had emerged from the lower hallway. He wasn't a drone. He was old, tired. He wore the loyalty uniform, but his boots were wrong, worn to the soles. His hand hovered near the radio at his belt. I raised my pistol. Caleb lowered. My arm. Don't. He'll call it in. He's hesitating. The man looked up, locked eyes with us, but he didn't move. Then he turned around and walked away. We froze. 2 seconds. Then Caleb grabbed my arm and ran. We made it out through the skylight just as the charge detonated behind us. A muffled thump, like a heartbeat. Smoke rose from the vents. The violet star cracked and fell. Back at the rendezvous tunnel, Arden was already waiting with Mira and Eli. Mira's sleeve was soaked with blood, but she waved me off. Just a scratch. What happened? I asked. Guard dog, she said. Real one, not the drone kind. And the tower? Gone. A minute later, Lena and Tomik stumbled in. Lena had a burn on her neck. Tomik had a limp. Transit docks are ash, Lena said. 2 casualties on their side, no losses on ours. I turned to Cass. He sat perfectly still, eyes closed, breathing slow. Then he opened them. Phase 1 is complete, he said. Then what? Arden asked. Cass looked around at all of us. All we've done is light a match, he said. Now we wait and see what burns. They called it the Night of the Violet Flame. The regime claimed the warehouse fire was started by radicals with ties to foreign intelligence. The broadcast tower blackout was blamed on an electrical surge. The armory dock explosion. A training accident. Lies. Elegant, rehearsed, state-approved lies. But people weren't stupid. In the market alleys, the resistance symbol, a slashed violet tree, began appearing in spray paint. A courier boy left a note tucked behind a statue in the central square. The ghost lives. In the northern quarter, an old man in a butcher's apron played the band anthem on a violin until they shot him in the street. The city was waking up. So, Salvek did what tyrants do when afraid. He made an example. 2 days after the strike, they found the Rook cell. That's what we called the group Elian had stationed along the border rail. Couriers, smugglers, messengers, 12 of them. Captured, broadcast live, one by one. The footage played on every street screen in Corvellum. Their names, their crimes, their deaths. I didn't cry. I didn't look away. Cass watched too. Jaw clenched, hands shaking. Arden punched the wall and broke her knuckle. Mira turned off the main generator and sat in the dark for 3 hours. Caleb disappeared for 12. When he came back, his boots were wet and his fists were bleeding. We didn't ask. I knew this would happen, Cass said, voice low. You still made the call, I replied. I did. Why? He looked at me. Because you're the only one who will understand. Because if we wait too long, we lose everything, he said aloud. You already lost them. No, Salvek did. You think people will see that? I think they already have. He held out a letter, printed on smuggled press paper. It was signed VT, the initials of Veyron Tal, one of the last loyal editors before the purge. It read, "We know the fire was not an accident. We saw the lights go out in the tower. We heard the screams in the loyalty files, and for the first time in 2 years, I smiled. They want us afraid. But the dead smile now too. It had been printed 20,000 times and passed hand to hand, pocket to pocket, breadbasket to breadbasket. You were right, I said. No, Cass replied. I was just fast enough. But Salvek moved faster. 3 new curfews, 37 arrests, a full blockade of the central zone, and something worse, something personal. They came for Crane at dusk. 2 men dressed like sewer workers. One posed as a wounded patrolman and collapsed near the tunnel entry. The other waited until Crane opened the gate and stuck him with a needle. He didn't scream, didn't have time. They dragged him away in under 60 seconds. Mira saw it happen through the motion capture feed. We were there in 90. Too late. All we found was a blood-stained cloth and an empty hypo needle. Cass read the note they left folded in Crane's satchel. Bring us the girl, or bring her back in pieces. I stared at the message, heart thudding in my ears. They mean me, I said. No, Cass said. Yes, they want leverage. They know who I am. They've always known. Arden stepped in. We're not trading you. I didn't ask you to. Caleb slammed his fist against the wall. This is a trap, pure bait. Yes, Cass said, but we don't ignore it. What do you suggest? I asked. Let them think we're scared, he said. Then we find the breach, and we break it. The night we lost Crane, I didn't sleep. I climbed into the deepest part of the tunnel system and sat with my back against the cold stone, listening to the water drip from cracked pipes above. Then I heard it. A voice. Quiet. Wrong. Too close. I rose slowly. The voice stopped. Footsteps echoed. Not mine. I drew my pistol and edged along the wall. Nothing. The corridor ended at a rusted door, bolted, from our side. I opened it. Empty. Just the abandoned storage chamber, filled with crates and half-melted wax candles. I turned to leave. That's when the lights went out. Panic is a strange thing. It doesn't rise in you like a wave. It drops, sudden, like a pit opening in your chest. I dropped to the ground, slid behind a crate, gun aimed at the dark, movement, a flicker in the edge of vision. I fired. The sound cracked through the tunnels like thunder, silence, then laughter. Low, cold, familiar. I expected better from the ghost's little bird. The voice came from nowhere and everywhere. I rose slowly. Show yourself. You're not ready yet, the voice said. But you will be. You're going to become very important soon, Sarah. Who are you? Oh, the voice chuckled. You already know. Then the lights came back on. The room was empty, but a mark had been scratched into the concrete near the door. A symbol, a circle pierced by a vertical blade. The mark of the Black Marks Division, Salvek's personal hounds. I returned to the base shaking. Caleb saw me and grabbed my arm. What happened? I was followed. His eyes narrowed. Did they touch you? No. Did they say anything? I told him, word for word. His face darkened with each syllable. That's Kester, he said. Who? Commander of the Black Marks, Salvek's favorite butcher. Used to run interrogation at Grey Deep Prison. What does he want? Doesn't matter. He doesn't want. He hunts. We told Cass. He didn't flinch, but something in his eyes dimmed. They're trying to break you, he said. It won't work. He studied me. No, he said. It won't. Then he gave me a folder. What's this? I asked. Your next target. I opened it. Inside was a photo. Blurry. Night vision. A compound surrounded by walls and drones. A prison. At the bottom of the page, Grey Deep Facility, Northwest Quadrant, and beneath that, a single line written in Cass's hand. Crane is still alive. The morning light broke through the trees, filtering softly across the forest floor, illuminating the small path leading to the heart of the forest. The air felt crisp. the scent of pine and earth thick and grounding. It was a new day, and with it came a renewed sense of hope. But hope, like everything else, was fragile, especially in these woods. Lena stood still, her breath coming out in short, measured puffs. She had been walking for hours, her boots heavy with mud and water from the rain the previous night. The map she had been clutching tightly was now torn at the edges, barely legible. Her compass, once a steady guide, seemed to be giving inconsistent readings. She had known the forest would be challenging, but the deeper she went, the more it felt like the trees themselves were conspiring against her. She needed to find him. She had to. Her thoughts drifted back to the reason for her journey, the promise she had made. A vow, spoken in desperation and fear, to save someone she couldn't afford to lose. And there he was, somewhere out there in the thick of the forest. Samuel, alone, trapped. Samuel had always been the steady one, the one who could navigate any wilderness, who could take care of others when things went wrong. But now, he was the one in need of rescue, his fate hanging by a thread. She shook her head, trying to clear the fog in her mind. There would be no time for doubts. He was still out there, waiting. The day passed slowly, the silence of the forest, only broken by the occasional call of a bird or the rustling of leaves. Lena pushed forward, never looking back, her determination the only thing driving her now. The moments of weakness that had plagued her earlier were fading, replaced by the sharp clarity of purpose. She would find Samuel. She had no other choice. But as the hours stretched on, the forest seemed to close in around her, its depths growing darker, more foreboding. Every tree looked the same. Every path led to another seemingly endless stretch of wilderness. The sun was beginning its descent, casting long shadows across the ground. Lena knew that nightfall would bring its own set of challenges. She found a clearing, the soft light of the setting sun glinting off the surface of a small stream. The sound of the water was soothing, and she knelt to drink from it, cupping her hands to collect the cool liquid. As she took a deep drink, she felt the weight of her exhaustion settle in her bones. She was so tired, but Samuel needed her, and as long as she had breath in her body, she wouldn't stop. After a few minutes, she stood and stretched, scanning the surrounding area. It was then that she saw it, a shape in the distance, a shadow moving among the trees. Her heart skipped a beat. Could it be him? Her instincts took over, and she started toward the movement, her body propelled by adrenaline. Every step felt like a beat of a drum, quickening the closer she got to the source of the disturbance. She moved silently, crouching low as she neared the spot. Her hand hovered over the hilt of the knife at her side. The shape was closer now, and Lena's heart hammered in her chest. But as she drew closer, her breath caught in her throat. It wasn't Samuel. It was a figure she didn't recognize, cloaked in dark rags, hunched over something at the base of a tree. For a moment, time seemed to slow down, and Lena felt a wave of unease wash over her. She watched for a moment, trying to make sense of what was happening. The figure was muttering to itself, the words lost in the wind. There was something almost unnatural about the way it moved, as though it was too fluid, too quick. And then there was the smell, the unmistakable stench of decay. Lena's hand went to the knife at her side, but she didn't make a move. She had to be smart. She couldn't afford to make a mistake. The figure seemed oblivious to her presence, too absorbed in whatever it was doing. After a long, tense moment, the figure straightened, its back now completely hunched as it turned toward her. Lena's breath caught in her throat. The face, it was pale, gaunt, with hollow eyes that seemed to peer right through her. The air around her grew colder, the wind picking up as if responding to the creature's presence. For a brief moment, the world felt wrong. Before Lena could make a move, the figure turned fully and darted off into the trees, disappearing like a shadow swallowed by the night. She stood frozen, her heart pounding in her chest. What had she just seen? Was it a person? A creature? The forest around her felt darker now, more sinister, and the weight of her journey seemed even heavier than before. She had thought she was close to finding Samuel, but this strange encounter left her shaken. Still, she couldn't let it stop her. Samuel was out there, somewhere. She had to keep going. As night fell, Lena set up camp by the stream, the fire crackling beside her as she stared into the flames. Her mind raced, her thoughts scattered. The figure, whatever it had been, haunted her thoughts, but she pushed it aside. There was only one thing that mattered. The night stretched on, the firelight flickering weakly against the pressing darkness of the forest. Lena's eyes never left the flames, her mind replaying the eerie figure she had seen earlier. Was it human? Or something else, something far older and more sinister? She shook her head, forcing herself to focus on the task at hand. Samuel. She needed to find Samuel. The wilderness could play tricks on the mind, but she couldn't afford to get lost in fear. She had a mission. She hadn't slept. The sound of every rustling leaf, every snapping twig, had her on edge. The forest, with its haunting stillness, felt as if it were closing in around her. The fire crackled, its warmth pushing back against the chill in the air. But Lena couldn't help but feel that the shadows of the night were alive, watching, waiting. In the distance, the faint hoot of an owl pierced the silence. Lena let out a quiet breath, her fingers tightening around the handle of the knife at her side. She had to keep moving forward, but each step felt like she was walking into an abyss. Hours passed. She had packed up camp and resumed her journey. Before the sun had even risen, the sounds of the night slowly giving way to the quiet murmur of dawn. Her senses were heightened now, every noise, every movement, amplified in the stillness. She had been walking for what seemed like an eternity when she finally spotted it. A small cabin, barely visible through the dense trees. It was an odd sight, in the middle of such a wild expanse. The structure looked ancient, its wooden walls worn and weathered, as though it had stood for decades, perhaps even longer. The roof sagged, and the windows were shattered, their glass long since gone. But something about it tugged at her, like an invisible thread pulling her in. Lena approached with caution, her feet barely making a sound as she moved closer to the door. She had learned a long time ago to trust her instincts. If the place felt wrong, she would leave. But if there was even the slightest chance that Samuel had passed through here, if there was any clue that might lead her to him, she had to investigate. She reached the door and hesitated. It creaked in protest as she pushed it open, the wood groaning under her touch. Inside, the air was stale, thick with dust and the smell of decay. Old furniture, some half-rotted, stood in haphazard disarray. The floorboards were cracked, and the walls were lined with strange symbols, barely visible under layers of grime. It was as if the place had been abandoned, yet it still held an unsettling presence. She stepped inside cautiously, her eyes scanning the room. A single candle sat on a small wooden table, its wick long since burned out. There was no sign of life, no sign of Samuel, but something about the cabin seemed off, like it had once been a place of secrets. Lena's fingers brushed over the symbols on the walls. They were unfamiliar, old, as though they belonged to some forgotten language or cult. Her mind raced with possibilities. Had Samuel stumbled upon this place? Was there something here that had led him astray? As she explored further, something caught her eye. A large, worn, leather-bound book lay on the floor, half hidden beneath a collapsed shelf. She knelt down to retrieve it, brushing the dust off the cover. The book was heavy, its pages yellowed with age, its binding cracked from years of neglect. As Lena opened it, the faintest whisper of wind seemed to stir around her, the air growing colder still. The pages were filled with drawings, strange, unsettling images of twisted trees, dark figures, and symbols that made her stomach churn. There were notes written in the margins, some faded and illegible. others written in a hand so precise it seemed deliberate, methodical. She flipped through the pages quickly, feeling an odd sense of urgency wash over her. And then she found it. Drawing of a figure. Tall, with elongated limbs, its face hidden in shadow. The figure stood in a forest, just like the one she was in now. Beneath it, written in an almost frantic script, was a single line. "He comes for those who stray too far." Lena's heart skipped a beat. She could feel the blood draining from her face. She had no doubt now. The figure she had seen earlier in the forest wasn't a random encounter. It was something much darker, something tied to this place. She slammed the book shut, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The sense of dread that had been building inside her was now impossible to ignore. She couldn't stay here. She needed to find Samuel, and fast. Lena turned to leave, but just as she reached the door, she heard it. A faint rustling from the trees, the unmistakable sound of something, or someone, moving in the shadows. Her heart pounded in her chest as she slowly stepped outside, her eyes scanning the surrounding woods. For a brief moment, she felt as though the forest itself was holding its breath. The rustling grew louder, closer. It was coming for her. She gripped her knife tighter, her pulse racing as she backed away from the cabin, every sense on high alert. The air felt colder now, oppressive, as though the darkness itself was pressing in on her. The rustling continued, coming from all directions now, as if she were surrounded. And then, from the depths of the trees, she saw it again. The figure, the same gaunt, shadowed form, its eyes burning with an eerie light. It moved toward her, its gait unnatural, too quick, too smooth. It was not just a creature of the forest, it was a hunter. Lena turned and ran, her legs pumping beneath her as she sprinted back into the woods. Branches scratched at her face, but she didn't slow down. The forest was no longer a place of refuge. It was a maze, a trap closing in around her. She had to outrun it, but the figure was faster, always just a step behind, its presence like a shadow lurking at the edges of her vision. Her breath was ragged now, the weight of her fear nearly overwhelming her, but she wouldn't stop. She couldn't. Lena's heart thundered in her chest, each frantic step taking her deeper into the unknown wilderness. Her lungs burned from the exertion, and her mind raced, trying to make sense of the terror that now gripped her. The figure was still behind her, its presence pressing against her every move, an inescapable force closing in on her. Her legs moved on instinct, guided by years of training and survival experience. But her thoughts were clouded with fear. What was it? What did it want? Why was it following her? The trees seemed to blur together as she sped through the underbrush, the thick branches grabbing at her arms and legs, slowing her down. Every snap of a twig underfoot made her stomach lurch, as though the forest itself was conspiring against her. The rustling in the distance, the quiet, haunting sound of the figure's pursuit, was constant now, echoing through the woods like a drumbeat. Lena glanced over her shoulder, just once, just enough to catch a glimpse of its gaunt form gliding between the trees. It was gaining on her. There was no denying it now. The figure's movements were too fluid, too precise. It wasn't human, and it wasn't just a force of nature. The world around her seemed to darken, the once distant sun now obscured by thick clouds that rolled in like a curtain. The temperature dropped, and she could feel the air growing heavier with every passing second. The woods, once familiar and comforting, now felt alien and oppressive. The figure was no longer just chasing her. It was driving her, pushing her towards something. A destination, a trap she couldn't yet see. She could hear it now. Louder, closer. Its footsteps, if they could be called that, were unnervingly quick, too quiet to be human, yet they still echoed in the silence of the forest. She had to do something. She couldn't outrun it forever. There had to be a way to lose it, to break free. And then, as though in response to her growing panic, the forest seemed to shift. Up ahead, a break in the trees, a clearing of sorts, a hill that rose sharply, leading to an outcrop of jagged rocks. If she could reach it, she might be able to get a better vantage point, maybe find a way to escape. But the figure was already too close, its shape moving faster than anything she'd ever seen. It wasn't just chasing her, it was hunting her. With one last burst of strength, Lena pushed herself toward the hill, her feet pounding the earth beneath her. Her breath came in ragged gasps, the cold air stinging her throat. She couldn't stop. Not now. She reached the base of the hill, her hands scraping against the rocky ground as she climbed, her muscles screaming in protest. She could hear it, that chilling rustle, growing louder and louder as it approached the base of the hill. She needed to get higher, to put distance between herself and the creature. But it wasn't just physical strength that was at work here. There was something else at play. Something dark, something ancient that moved in the woods, and she could feel it closing in on her soul. Her fingers grasped a rough rock ledge, pulling herself up the incline with everything she had left. The wind began to pick up again, howling through the trees as if urging her on. The sound of the figure's pursuit was deafening now, too close for comfort, but she didn't dare look back. Her eyes locked on the top of the hill. Almost there, just a few more feet. But as she reached the top, something stopped her cold. Figure, standing motionless in the center of the clearing. At first, she thought it was a trick of the light, a shadow cast by the trees. But as she approached, the figure became clearer, and dread seeped into her veins. It wasn't the same one that had been chasing her. It was taller, more solid, and it stood perfectly still, as if waiting. Lena froze, her breath caught in her throat, her body tense. She hadn't expected this, hadn't prepared for another entity. The figure was humanoid, but its proportions were off, its limbs unnaturally long and thin, its face obscured by a hooded cloak. The figure's hands were clasped before it, its movements subtle but deliberate, as though it were a sentinel in the woods, guarding something. But then it spoke. The voice was low, almost a whisper, but it carried through the wind and the rustling leaves. "You've gone too far." Lena's heart skipped a beat. The voice was strange, foreign, as if it didn't belong to any language she knew. But the meaning was clear. The figure was aware of her presence, aware of her every move. "Samuel," she whispered, her voice barely audible against the rising wind. "I need to find him." The figure's head tilted slightly, the movement slow and deliberate. Then, it raised one long, spindly finger pointing toward the darkness beyond the clearing. "The forest will give you what you seek," it said, its voice like the rustling of dry leaves. "But only if you are willing to sacrifice." Lena's pulse quickened. Sacrifice? What did that mean? She didn't have time for riddles or cryptic messages. She needed answers. She needed Samuel. Without thinking, Lena took a step forward. Her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, none of them coherent. All she knew was that she had to keep moving. Keep fighting. The figure didn't move, didn't stop her. Instead, it simply stood there, watching her, its unblinking gaze following her every motion. Lena felt a cold chill wash over her as she approached the edge of the clearing. She had no choice but to press forward, but a part of her, deep inside, her heart, knew that this was a point of no return. Whatever lay beyond the trees, whatever the forest held, would change everything. But she couldn't turn back now, not when she was so close. The rustling behind her grew louder. The figure was still there, silent, but she could feel its presence looming. It was still watching her, still waiting. Lena's feet carried her forward into the dark heart of the forest, where shadows stretched long and twisted, and the air itself seemed alive with menace. And somewhere, deep within that darkness, Samuel waited. Lena moved forward, her steps now less hurried, but no less determined. The clearing had disappeared behind her, swallowed by the oppressive weight of the forest once again. The shadows seemed to gather around her, stretching long and sinister, as if the trees themselves had turned into silent witnesses to the drama unfolding. Her thoughts raced, but they felt distant, like whispers at the edge of her mind. The words of the figure, the strange entity, still echoed in her ears. The forest will give you what you seek, but only if you are willing to sacrifice. What did it mean? What would the forest demand in exchange for Samuel's safety? She clenched her fists, her resolve hardening. She would not leave this place without him. She couldn't. The promise she had made burned too brightly in her chest, and yet a deep dread lingered in the pit of her stomach, gnawing at her, whispering that this journey, this chase, was only just beginning. The air around her was thick with the scent of wet earth, moss, and decay. It had rained the night before, and the dampness of the forest floor clung to her boots as she pressed onward, her breath rising in visible clouds in the cold morning air. But the deeper she ventured, the more the silence weighed on her, wrapping around her like a suffocating blanket. There were no birds singing, no rustling of small creatures in the underbrush, just a suffocating stillness that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. She couldn't help but glance over her shoulder, half expecting to see the figure from the clearing still watching her, but there was nothing. The forest was empty. Or was it? Lena's pulse quickened as she continued forward, the feeling of being watched intensifying. The rustling from before, the sound that had chased her through the woods was now gone, but the unease hadn't lifted. It was as though something was waiting for her, just out of sight, observing her every move. Then she saw it. Up ahead, through the thick trees, a faint glow, a pale, eerie light that seemed out of place in the darkness of the forest. At first, Lena thought it was a trick of the light, a flicker of her imagination playing tricks on her. But as she drew closer, the glow intensified, and she realized it was not the sun breaking through the canopy, but something else, something unnatural. Her heart skipped a beat. The glow led her to a small, ancient stone circle, its surface covered in moss and vines. The stones were arranged in a perfect ring, each one standing tall, as though they had been placed there deliberately, centuries ago. In the center of the circle, there was a well, its edges worn smooth from age and the elements. But it wasn't the well that caught her attention. It was the light. It radiated from within, an otherworldly luminescence that seemed to pulse with life, like a heartbeat from the very earth itself. Lena approached slowly, hesitant, but drawn, to the well as if something was pulling her forward. She could feel the power emanating from it, a raw, ancient force that resonated deep in her chest. This place, this stone circle, felt like the heart of the forest itself, a place of deep magic, a place where time and reality were bent to the will of something far older than the world she knew. She paused at the edge of the well, peering down, into its depths. But there was no water, only blackness, endless, unfathomable darkness. It seemed to draw her in, as though it was calling to her, whispering her name in the back of her mind. Lena. The voice was soft, familiar, and it sent a shiver down her spine. It was a voice she knew, a voice that she had longed to hear for days. "Samuel," she whispered, her voice trembling. The glow from the well flickered in response, and Lena's heart raced as she took a step closer, her hands gripping the stone edge. The air grew colder, and a gust of wind whipped through the trees, making the shadows dance around her. She felt the presence of something else, something vast and unknowable, pressing against her from all sides. "You came," the voice whispered again, this time louder, more insistent. But not in time. Lena's eyes widened as she realized what she was hearing. This wasn't just Samuel speaking. It was something else, something inside him, something in him. No, she breathed, her chest tightening with fear. "What's happened to you?" There was no answer, only the echoing silence of the forest. Lena looked around desperately, trying to make sense of the situation. This place, the stone circle, the well, it wasn't just a relic of the past. It was something living, something that had been waiting for her. She had walked into a trap, a place where time and reality blurred, and she realized too late that the forest hadn't been leading her to Samuel. It had been leading her to the heart of its power. "Sacrifice," the voice murmured again, and this time it was no longer Samuel's voice. It was something darker, older, something that had claimed him, that had twisted him into a vessel for its own will. Lena's mind reeled. The sacrifice the forest demanded wasn't just hers to make, it was Samuel's. His life had already been claimed, and she had unwittingly walked into the heart of its hunger. Her fingers trembled as she gripped the stone of the well, the energy around her intensifying. The light from within the well pulsed stronger now, its glow blinding, overwhelming. She could feel her body being drawn into the light, as though the well itself was trying to pull her in. And then, as if on cue, the figure appeared. Not the one that had chased her before, but another. This one was taller, its form more solid, more imposing. It stepped from the shadows, its presence like a weight on her chest, and in its hollow, empty eyes, Lena saw the truth. It was the guardian of the forest, the keeper of the ancient magic, and it was here to claim what was owed. Lena's heart pounded in her chest. There was no escape, no running, no hiding. The forest had claimed its price, and Samuel, he was lost.